Welcome to PR Talk, sponsored by the PRSA of Oregon and part of the MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. This is your host, Amy Rosenberg, founder of Veracity and author of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. Help other people find our podcast by subscribing, rating, giving us a review, or sharing on social media. Hi, everybody. I have Kat Hicker here. Hi, Kat.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so everybody knows that Kat is the founder of Castleforbes Communications and the co-founder of the Speakeasy Club. And so, Kat, tell us, where are you in the world right now?
I am in Dubai, and it's really, really hot right now. So if you hear noises in the background, that might be the fan.
Oh, yeah. So are you, what time is it there for you?
It is 9 p.m. currently.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. So
No problem.
Give us just a rundown on your background and how you, because it looks like you're a PR manager at Google in Northern Europe, but now you're in Dubai. So just kind of give us a rundown on how you found yourself working in Dubai.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everybody. I'm so glad that I was able to get on here. I just love the podcast, following it all the time, especially as a freelancer. It's just a brilliant platform to kind of stay up to date and almost like have the non-existing colleagues around me to have a chat with about PR stuff. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I just recently founded my own company at the end of last year. But I do have experience in PR and communications for the last 12 years, and that's basically across 3 continents and counting. So I definitely come around. I started my career actually as a freelancer in Germany, and then landed my first in-house job with McDonald's back in the day, with the German headquarter in Munich. And I was essentially doing everything digital comms, social media back then, when it was still very, very new, when we still had things like Periscope that nobody talks about anymore.
Okay.
And then,
well, I want to just clarify for everyone. You were in-house at McDonald's, did you say?
Exactly.
PR for McDonald's. Okay, yeah, I just want to clarify. And keep going.
And then in 2015, I decided to move to Ireland, and that's when Google hired me. And I did actually start in marketing when I went over, and then I very quickly made the change back to communications, back to PR, just missed it way too much. Did a couple of comms projects on the sides anyways. So the plan was always to go back. Unfortunately, that didn't happen in Ireland. So I had to move to Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So yet another move. That was 2018. And over there, I was heading B2B PR for Northern Europe. So that's 7 countries. That's the Scandics and Benelux. And I was with Google there for about 3 years. And then I moved over to Dubai. Actually, not because of a job this time, but simply because my partner moved over here. He was working with Amazon at the time. We did meet at Google in Ireland before that. You might detect a little bit of an Irish accent. That's not because I'm Irish. That's because my fiance is. Oh. I'm actually German myself. But yeah, so we moved over here, and then I started working with an Uber entity called Careem. So essentially the Uber of the Middle East. It is a daughter company of Uber that was just bought a couple of months before I joined, and led all sorts of comms for them. So internal, external, social media. And yeah, I did that until last year. I think it was June, July. So it's about a year now. And then I decided to go off on myself and start solo again, just like I started my career.
Mm-hmm. So how's going solo? How's that? And just tell us, what your company is all about and who you work with now.
It's exciting to say the least, and I never stop learning this. Something new every single day, and I really, really appreciate it. So essentially, I just plucked those things that I enjoyed the most in my career and brought this together in my own company. So that is anything to do with crisis communication. I have a specialization in this. I did it across different markets, and I'm just a problem solver by nature. So I love that part of my job. I love speaker training, media training, those kind of things. I did a lot for Google XX over the past 10 years. So this is a part that I wanted to take as well. And all of that combined is Castleforbes Communications. So a PR consultancy that essentially operates with clients across the US, Europe, and the Middle East, and mostly with clients in the tech sector, real estate, finance, including crypto as well, and in the education sector. So a lot of different clients, a lot of different areas, but the Middle East especially is quite wild. So you have to cover a lot.
Mm-hmm. So, and what do you mean by that? The Middle East, and of course, I want to talk about PR across different markets, like kind of like literally, like how do you work in different markets in a different way? But then also, so are you saying that you also work in all the markets simultaneously as well?
Sometimes, yeah, it depends on the client. So most of the time I do have a client that is based in a specific market, and then I stick to that market. So they might want a PR campaign in that market. So that's where it's happening essentially. I do work a lot with startups, and especially those are very much still tied to the location. But I did recently start working with a couple of companies based in the US, but they do operate across all sorts of markets. And especially when it's a small company, especially when it is a startup, they are looking for a person who can essentially do it all. And that's where my experience comes in handy, because I know a lot of those markets. So when they ask me, hey, we need a campaign that runs across the Middle East, across parts of Europe and the US, I was actually able to do that. And we did run it simultaneously. So I have a team that I pull in whenever I need them. So mostly made up of freelancers that help me out in the market and help me out, especially with translations as well. So thankfully I can do a lot of that myself. But for example, I don't speak Arabic. So for that, I need somebody. But yeah, we ran it simultaneously, and it was very, very successful. It's an awful lot of work and you really have to kind of switch between the mindsets. But yeah, it's great.
How do you do that? Well, first of all, tell us what you mean by I think you said the Middle East is a little
wild.
Different. Wild. That's what. And so, but tell us why, and then also tell us then how do you switch a campaign, like the same campaign per market?
What I mean by wild is essentially there are very little rules, and you just go ahead and do things without kind of thinking about it too much. And there is a lot of benefits to it. And it's great to kind of have that freedom to just go ahead and do something. But on the other end, you sometimes do miss that you can't follow a certain pattern or framework, or you sometimes work with people who don't really know what they're doing, or they're doing it for the first time. So there are ups and downs to this. But I give you a specific example. So when I pitch to a journalist here, it is a very informal process. In an ideal scenario, you know somebody who knows that journalist. Otherwise, it's very hard to get an in. But once you drop a name of somebody that they know, it's already easier to start a conversation. Conversations here are very informal. So a lot of things are happening via WhatsApp or a very quick phone call. And if they're somewhere around in the area, you actually do meet them for a cup of coffee. And a lot of business deals are done over a cup of coffee. Whereas in Germany, for example, where I did PR for about 6 years, it is a very formal process, and you need to make sure that you're absolutely reaching out to the right person, which is never the editor-in-chief. So you really need to do the digging, who's the right contact. And then there's a formal pitching email that is followed up by a phone call. So there's a whole cadence that you have to follow through. So I do appreciate the Middle East for being a bit more easy on those things. At the same time, like I said, sometimes it can get complicated if there is no process whatsoever in place, and it's hard to follow up with contacts or get a hold of them. But yeah, it's an experience to say the least.
So, okay. So yeah, I was curious, is it easier or harder if there's no process? I mean, I guess you're kind of saying it's a little bit of both.
It's on two levels. So as a human being, I appreciate less process and more human interaction. And I think a lot of kind of issues, miscommunications and things can be solved more quickly over here by literally just picking up the phone and saying, hey, I think I misread your message. Can you repeat that to me? Or you didn't get back to me for 2 weeks. What's going on? Anything happening? And then usually you just get back, oh no, I was on holidays and I didn't put in out of office. So it's fairly easy to solve problems. On a professional level, you cannot rely on certain things. So when I do have a process in place of, okay, I have 2 weeks of pitching and that's when the press release is going out. I want to give it to a couple of outlets under embargo. Then I do have a strategy and I do have a process. But then if the person that I'm reaching out to is not there and I can't get in touch with them, or they tell me, hey, I take care of it and never get back to you, then that's a problem. In other markets, they are more reliable to at least come back with some sort of feedback, even if it's a no. So on a professional level, probably harder. On a personal level, definitely easier and more human.
And are they kind of receptive to pitches? Because it does sound in the Middle East like it is personal and it's about relationships possibly. So does it feel easier to pitch in the Middle East? Or, I mean, not easier. I know, just you know how when we send a pitch in the US, and it's probably the same in Europe, you just feel like there's a little bit of a wall and you feel like sometimes a little nervous and a little awkward. So in the Middle East, does it feel a little bit more easygoing?
Yes, I'd say so. I definitely say so. So yes, it is obviously easy to know somebody. So it's easier to kind of start the conversation, but I guess that's the case in every market to some regard. But the part about, I do sometimes have clients, especially with startups, that don't have a really, really good news hook, but we still need to get them out there somewhere and somehow to get a couple of eyeballs on what they're doing. So I already know when I'm pitching, I know this is not strong. So the likelihood of me getting something into the press is very slim. But then you have this other person on the other side of the line who's just actually listening and is interested in, it doesn't matter how big or small it is, they still have their editorial rules to follow. They still have a certain pattern that they're looking after in terms of which stories are going out which time. But I feel like they are more open to listening to small and big stories on the same level.
That's great. That sounds wonderful.
It is, yeah.
But so do you find that the US and Europe are more similar, or what are the differences there between the two? Like between US and Europe?
Yeah, I don't want to say too much about the US because that's definitely the market that I have the least experience in. And I know that especially like West Coast and East Coast, again, is super different. And if you pitch to a journalist in New York, it's a very different outcome than pitching to a journalist in LA. And it's the same in Europe. So Germany is wildly different to the UK, even though they're quite close. So you can't really put it all in one bucket, but the big difference that I see is Europe is more formal when it comes to the pitching process, and there are more rules around when they publish something and when they're not. You get a no much quicker, which is good for you to just move on and try a different angle, but also obviously it's quite harsh. Sometimes there is no consideration whatsoever. I feel like in the US, there's at least a little bit of a conversation happening before you get that no, but you do get a little bit more feedback, why you get this no and how you can improve next time. So that is definitely one thing that I experienced. Another one is probably that the lead times in Europe are much longer than in the US. And that is more like continental Europe, so Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, etc. It's again different for the UK and for Ireland, but they oftentimes publish quarterly. So you really need to get in early because of limited space and because of a specific topic that this magazine or whatever it is has for that quarterly publishing. So it's much harder to actually pitch something, and the pitch needs to be much more precise. And the last thing that I'm going to say, and this is something specific to the UK journalists are probably some of the toughest that I worked with in my entire career. And one of the reasons is that they love to throw dirt at 4 p.m. on a Friday. So they dig something up, they found something, they want a statement on something, and then they send it at a time where they know you're halfway out of the office already. You won't have enough time to properly do your research, have all the statements approved, etc. So the likelihood of you sending something over that you're not mega happy with is high. And then they take that and they run with it. So it's quite a hostile environment to be working in, whereas I have not experienced that in any other market in Europe or the US.
Interesting. So you experience that because you do handle a little bit of crisis PR, or have you even experienced that when you haven't had your crisis hat on and just for any old startup you experience that?
Mostly in relation to a crisis, yeah. And I handled quite a lot of crisis during my time. I think every market that I worked in, I had at least one big crisis to deal with. And yeah, it's especially when you work, obviously, for a company like Google or Uber, there's always something going on. And there are so many areas of attack. And yeah, I love crisis comms. It has a process. I'm very good in kind of keeping calm when you have to be. I'm very good at kind of bringing a team together and making that all work. But if the circumstances that you're giving, for example, in the UK are so tight, then even the best person in crisis comms is struggling to actually get back with something that is good.
Mm-hmm. So then what is the process for crisis comms then? I think I could imagine possibly, but what would you say the process would be?
I give you a specific example. I did work for a client once that they haven't been based in the UK, but they have big operations in the UK, which makes it even a little bit worse because they're usually slightly friendlier to actual UK companies based in the UK, and they're not that friendly to any foreign company. But essentially, we prepared a campaign. The send out was planned for a Monday. And on Friday evening, 5 p.m., I received a phone call of a journalist that I actually know quite well. So I was lucky enough that he actually gave me the phone call before the email came. And he informed me that there is this investigative journalism broadcast program in the UK that is looking into my client, and they found something, and they're basically about to send over a whole list of questions and allegations that they researched on, and they wanted me to get back within 5 hours. Otherwise, they would publish whatever they have, and I can't review it. So obviously 5 p.m. on a Friday, that means you're going to be busy the entire weekend. And you have to also, I had to obviously think about, are we still going out on Monday? How severe is this? Maybe we should postpone this, etc. So the first thing I do then is I put down the phone. I get this email a couple of minutes later into my phone box, and then I start putting together the team. So it's not just me, it's a couple of people from the comms team, but it's also legal involved. It's policy involved, and obviously on the client side, they involved a couple of people. So it's a core team that is dedicated for this specific issue, and those people need to be available 24/7 from the moment the crisis starts till the crisis ends. There's always one main point of contact. In that case, that was me. And then I start basically delegating different tasks. And we create one place where all the materials go. So we start drafting statements. We put together different background information. So there's one folder where all of this goes into, and it has very specific deadlines of who has to sign it off and until when does it have to be signed off. So that way you can't lose track of maybe missing a deadline to get back to them or whatever that is. And then you have usually somebody monitoring whatever else is going on in the market. Is there anything leaked early? What about the competition? Are they maybe affected by this as well? So you reach out to your contacts. Sometimes it makes sense to partner up with them and not go through this alone. Yeah. So that's it in a nutshell. It's a whole big process, but it needs all hands on deck for usually a period of 48 hours. And if you're lucky, you can handle it. And if you're not lucky, then it just goes on.
Mm-hmm. So then do you ever feel weird trying to make plans for the weekend, or like just go? I mean, I can't imagine trying to go out of town. What would you do?
So this is the beauty of being a freelancer now and having my own company, because now I have clients and I work on projects, and those end at one point, right? So at the moment, for example, I do have 3 active clients, but none of them are in a position where they would be in a crisis anytime soon. I wouldn't even deal with that if it happens. I have other projects with them going on. So right now I'm absolutely safe, but that was also one of the reasons why I decided to leave corporate, simply because you had to be on call 24/7, and it just got a little bit much. And with the pandemic on top, and kind of, we all have been in this situation where we worked longer hours just because we work from home all of a sudden, and it was just harder to get away from the desk. So all of that combined is a lot of stress, and so I'm very glad that I'm in a different position now.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, as you mentioned, you're a freelancer. We have a lot of freelancers listening to this. So are you looking for people to bring on to your team, or how anything like that, or how does that work for you?
Yeah. So at the moment, I really only work with freelancers. I don't have anybody full time yet who's actually doing comms and PR. I do have a couple of people looking into finance and customer service and those kind of things, but I'm the only person who's actually doing the comms and PR. And I have a pool of freelancers in all of those markets that I'm working in that I regularly tap into. And those are usually people who really enjoy project work. They don't want to be in long-term relationship with clients. They appreciate the fact that it might be a 3-month project and then you're out of it. And I kind of operate on the same level. So yes, absolutely. I'm always on the hunt for new freelancers. In my opinion, freelancers are extremely valuable. And it's always nice to have new and fresh brains around you and just kind of learn from their experience as well.
And how did you find your current freelancers?
Oh, very, very different scenarios. A lot of them I used to work with, maybe in corporate, or we did hire them as freelancers while I was in corporate. So a lot of kind of old contacts that I reached out to once I started my own company. And a lot of those just kind of went on working with me then. People that I used to hire from agencies that are now freelancers and doing their own thing. But then when I really...
Does it seem like everyone's going freelance now?
A little bit, yeah. Isn't it? I don't know about you, but it feels like a lot of people, especially through the pandemic, kind of made that decision to do their own thing and just go out there and try it.
Well, I just kind of thought, even before the pandemic, I thought that our industry was going to go that way because, because of what you're saying, we don't always work banker's hours. We don't work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. If you're being called in on a Friday afternoon to work all weekend, there's got to be some flexibility somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you don't want to be called in, and so then you start your own thing, and that's what you've done. Anyway, so back to the whole topic at hand. You're mentioning various ways of working in Europe, how it might be different across countries. Is it the same in the Middle East for you, or are you kind of just focused on one market in the Middle East?
No, I'm based here, but essentially I'm operating wherever I'm needed. So currently in my portfolio, I do have 2 clients in Germany, 1 US client, 3 clients in MENA, 1 client in the UK. So it always changes, but it's just a very diverse portfolio.
But I mean, like in the Middle East, if you're pitching, would you pitch one area of the Middle East differently than a different area of the Middle East?
Oh, gotcha. Yes, because you do have to make the difference between local media and global media. So obviously here in Dubai, we have the likes of CNN and CNBC and Bloomberg and everything. They have local offices, so I do have to pitch to them very differently than I would to Khaleej Times and the National and Al Arabiya and those kind of local outlets. So that is one big difference. Obviously, you do mostly talk to Americans or people from the UK when you pitch to those international outlets, and you do mostly talk to people from the Arabic region when you pitch to the local ones. But then there's also a difference between, for example, tech press or finance press. So when I work with startups, I do a lot of niche pitching. So there are a lot of outlets over here that really focus on crypto and NFTs, etc. The pitching to them is super different than pitching to a business outlet. I'd argue that's the same in every market, that depending on which kind of area you're pitching, it's slightly different. But what is new for me is this whole crypto and NFT space, and I definitely needed a little bit of time to get into it. What that reminded me of is when I worked for Google, a big part of my job was to try and so I did B2B PR. So I tried to get new products or feature updates, etc., into the press. Now, when you talk to an engineer at Google, they throw a lot of jargon at you. They throw a lot of terms at you that you've never heard in your life. And my job is to make this easier and sound like something that is actually interesting for anybody out there. And the way that they talk and the way they describe things, that is what reminded me of pitching to the crypto and the NFT press here. You have to speak their language. You have to fully understand what their world looks like, what their little universe looks like. You have to do your research and read the pieces that they just published. If you reach out to an author and you haven't read a single piece of what they did, they won't talk to you. So that is actually a very interesting area.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. So crypto and NFT is an interesting area.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it feels like there's a bit of a wave now. When I look around and look at my colleagues in PR, I mean, you roughly know who's doing PR at the other big tech companies, etc. Half of them left and went to join crypto companies. So it seems to be a trend. It's something that we all need to look into more closely, I guess, and spend more time with. I'm not going to lie, I haven't, I think, fully grasped the topic yet, but I certainly spend a lot more time dealing with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have talked about the differences between all of the markets, but what would you say the similarities are with the pitching process in all three international markets?
Yeah, I think the most obvious one is probably the way that you write a press release. So far, I haven't seen any differences. I think that's pretty much the same everywhere. And what's also the same is that journalists really do appreciate you sending over a good quality piece of writing rather than sending anything over. So that's definitely something that they have in common. I guess the rough timings of when to send out a press release, that would be the same as well. So somewhere between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And I think it was Wednesdays or Thursdays that work best in most of the markets. So there's not much of a difference there.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's interesting you bring up press releases, because I was sitting there listening, thinking about how you work in the Middle East a little differently, because you're talking about, I think you said you sometimes will send a note over WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So my thought was, do you use press releases in the Middle East? But it sounds like you do.
Yes, we do. But it comes with a lot of communication around it. So it's almost like, and that only changed within the last couple of years, I'd say. The press release has become more of a fact sheet these days. So you have your pitch, and here I oftentimes literally send it via WhatsApp. It could be a small text, it could be even a voice note, depending on how good my relationship is with that person, and I also know their preferences. And only when I get a reaction to this and we actually start a conversation, that's when I share the press release, and it's literally used as a bit of a fact sheet. And then there's a lot more information around it that is being shared. So it might be that I then meet with them and give them everything else literally while we're sitting over a cup of coffee, and they note it down, or they send me voice messages back and I answer in voice messages. It's a lot of different communications channels that you have to check and be across. So the press release is certainly not the main medium anymore.
Yeah. No, it just sounds really fun, like really active working over there, like kind of more hands-on, like a lot less removed. Because, sometimes here we send a email and you just feel like you're just talking to a void. You know what I mean? So it sounds exciting. I guess one last question would be, if you had any advice for yourself when you were first starting your career, what would it be?
That's a good one. I think it's a bit of an old one, but then again, it never really gets old, is embrace the mistakes that you're making. It's the best way to learn something. And I mean, learn fast, make the mistakes and learn fast and do it better. But I think I was very, very afraid at the beginning of my career to make mistakes, and especially in PR. When I had my first crisis, that was when I was working at McDonald's, and it was a severe crisis, and it's something that is still kind of stuck with me. You'll never forget your first big crisis that you have to deal with. But the main point of that is you learn from it. You don't see it as a failure, you see it as a lesson, and then you implement that wherever you go, and you get better and you improve. And don't be afraid of the kind of impact and influence that you have with your job, which we certainly do. But yeah, I guess that's what I would like to say. And let me just add one more thing. This is also a bit of a culture difference, right? The kind of admitting to error and learning from it. It's something that we are quite good in Europe, but it is a bit of a problem over here. Admitting mistakes in the Middle East is not very common. They are moving towards it slowly but surely, but this is why I thought this would be a good advice, especially for maybe freelancers working across the Middle East as well.
That's really interesting. Yeah. We love talking about cultural differences, and we find that as we do PR, as you do different types of outreach to press in different ways in different markets, it's all cultural, really. It has nothing to do with PR, really.
Very
it's
much.
Just how different. Yeah.
And that's the lovely part of our job, right? We can be humans and enjoy the differences and embrace them.
Yeah. So how can people find you if they want to reach out, have any questions for you?
Sure, yeah. You can obviously find me on LinkedIn under Katharina Hicker, or Kat Hicker. I think you can find me under both names. And then Castleforbes Communications is on LinkedIn as well. And then on Instagram under Castleforbes C, and Castleforbes Comms on TikTok. Yes, I recently started TikTok. Totally getting into it now. If you want to have a giggle, definitely head over.
Yeah, I'll go look, because I just started it too, because you know what? I'm going to keep doing it because my daughter's best friend said she likes my TikToks.
There you go. Exactly. So the argument of I'm too old for this just doesn't count anymore. Just jump, eyes closed, just jump. And if anything, you learn a lot about yourself.
Yeah. And honestly, I'll do anything to be cool in the eyes of my daughter and her friends.
Exactly. Like every mom.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a good night over there. We really appreciate you joining us at nighttime.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening. For more PR insight, be sure to check out Amy's book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, at prtalk.co. Also, please subscribe, rate, or leave us a review.